This video is sponsored by all of our paid members on Patreon. These are the guys who support KaspaChess financially. In return, we give them extra study materials and other premium content on Patreon to thank them in style. Not to mention that all of our patrons are at liberty to make video requests and ask any chess related questions. You can join free membership and pay later if you want through the link in the comment section down below. Today I am forced to address this once and for all. I'm talking about the position that we get in my new c5 Alapin defense that most people don't know about. That's after e4, pawn to c5, knight f3, and then instead of playing standard boring moves, you just go knight f6. Kind of the Alapin's defense, although this is originally called the Nimzowitsch variation, a very interesting and surprise weapon. The intention is not to play the common lines of the Sicilian defense. We are not interested in theory. Now hold on, in my first tutorial video I said pawn to e5 is the top played move. But you know what? That is in the Masters database. This is what most people play in over-the-board games. But it is almost equal with the second common move, knight c3. In fact, if I switch over to the Lichess database, you will see that knight c3 is the top played move. When you play knight f6 on the second move, most white players don't know what is really happening. They don't know what you're up to. So they don't want to risk it by going e5, allowing you to do whatever you know. And I showed you guys one interesting gambit that I've never seen anywhere on internet, which can go as follows. After pawn to d4, instead of taking, which is a normal move, you test your opponent's patience by going pawn to b5. My own weird gambit. And the idea is, after bishop takes, you just want to get back that piece in this way with queen a5 check, threatening to take. And you can see in the Lichess database, everyone plays knight c3, which is a blunder due to knight takes, and you end up winning the free bishop. So you're just up a piece in this position. And just a quick revision before I show you the main area of our meat in today's study, which is knight c3 on move number 3. If white plays e5 and then you go knight d5. Once again, whenever you see the move c4, you have a choice to go knight b4, knight b6, or knight c7. But once again, if there's a move you want to play, it's knight c7. Why? The problem with knight b6 in this particular position is that it doesn't come with tempo. You are not attacking anything on c4. You only want to play knight b6 if there is something to attack on c4. Under normal circumstances, we like playing knight b6 when white's bishop is on c4 on its own. So these are moments where you want to play knight c7. At least in the near future, you have an opportunity to push pawn to b5, maybe after a6 or d5 and take back with a knight. From here, you will see most of your opponents playing non-committal moves such as knight c3 and bishop e2. If pawn to d4, by the way, the best you can do is just to take, and after knight takes, this is the moment I want you to master. And always remember, you can play knight c6 and attack the e5 pawn. That's okay. But if you don't want to exchange queens, you can simply go pawn to d6. Why pawn to d6? Because white's queen is obstructed by its own piece and not eyeing our queen directly, so there will be no any queen exchange. In this position, it becomes easier for us to take back with the queen and maybe threaten to go e5 next. But you're not going to see your opponents giving up their right to castle. They mostly play knight c3, as you can see in the Lichess database. And now this is when it makes sense to go e5. Going back to the king's pawn game, if you think about it, if knight db5 is played, you have an option to take, but again, you can save your queen this way, because taking your queen won't be the wisest thing your opponent can do. You're going to be up a piece, as you can see, and maybe in the near future after knight takes b5, you will play queen b6. Not that you can't play queen g6 due to knight c7 check. You're gonna lose your rook. You always want to put your queen either on a6, on b6, or on c6. Lastly, if white takes back with a queen, now it makes sense for us to develop our queen's knight with tempo that comes with an attack. We can't just go d6 because at the end of the day, we're going to remain with an isolated pawn. That is also fine, but not the best option. So knight c6 attacking the queen. If queen e4, that's when it makes sense for us to go d6 or probably d5. If ampersand, at least we won't have to trade off queens to exchange queens. You know what I'm talking about. And the whole point is just to get rid of our d pawn, which is our burden in most of these Sicilian positions, so that we can freely play pawn to e5 next. Develop our bishop, cast a shot, maybe put our bishop on f6 this time. After knight c6, if white plays queen d1, again d6 is okay, but we're going to remain with an isolated pawn at the end of the day. You see, to completely get rid of your d pawn weakness, instead of going d6 and end up remaining with an isolated pawn later, better go pawn to e6, because you just paved the way for your dark squad bishop, and that's a piece you want to place on d6 after pawn to d6. Say after knight c3, now it makes sense for us to go d5 or pawn to d6, knowing if e takes, we just take back with our bishop and we're okay. We're going to play this in a tortoise style. This is okay. After bishop e3, we even cast a shot. Next, queen e7, rook e5, bishop g4, etc. Again, after pawn to d6, if white doesn't take right away and say they play bishop g5, queen d7 is the logical move. If pawn takes, again, we just take back with dignity. After pawn to e6, if they play bishop f4, getting ready for d6, well, first we can do this. Bishop b4 check. If knight c3, after bishop b4 check, we can just mess up their pawn structure like this and cast a shot. Now back on move 2. The question that begs to be answered comes from Raising Arizona, and it reads, after knight f6, I can see everyone just playing knight c3 and playing a regular open Sicilian. I guess the question is, what are we supposed to do, or how should we continue after knight c3? So what my subscriber is asking is this. After e4, c5, knight f3, and knight f6, most people are playing knight c3, and I agree, that's true. I did cover this line in brief in my first tutorial video, by the way. You should watch that. So this is one line you need to study over and over, especially if you are preparing for a rated tournament game. Most of your opponents are going to be playing this, not that they know what they are doing, but because they are curious, they are in doubt and wondering what you are up to with this Alapin system. So they want to keep you in the Sicilian books. After this, there are actually two opening lines that I would recommend. One is the knight c6 line, and the second one is the pawn to e6 line. And I promise we're not going to be playing the common lines of the Sicilian defense again, because we are not interested in theory. We don't have time for that. And here is an exciting news before I proceed. Regardless of who you are, if you have an online business or even a tech solution, you can actually sponsor my videos so that I can help you boost your brand. Even if you're just a freelancer or a software developer, the link is in the comment section down below. Right, let's continue. If you're not a fan of pawn to e5 and playing that Alapin stuff, or if that seemed to be bulky, try this. Knight c6, kind of the 4 knights game, right? And the plan is very simple. You might need a pen and notebook for this. There are two popular moves that white players will play from here. In fact, 3: bishop b5, pawn to e5, and pawn to d4. Let's begin with e5. This is the simplest of all. Since you don't have knight d5, you want to go knight g4, like what we do in the Budapest defense. If pawn to d4 is played, you simply take, because your main goal is to take back the pawn on e5. That's all, so that you can safely play a6 and d5 or d6 and e5, whichever move order you like. After knight takes, this is when you simply take back on e5. White may be tempted to play pawn to f4 here, but you have knight takes d4. The whole idea is just to have a knight on c6 at the end of the day, regardless of what white does. The queen is under attack, so they play something like queen e4 or queen f2 the last time I checked. And then, since there's already a pawn on f4, e5 won't make sense. That's why we want to play e6, followed by pawn to d5 next. After bishop b5, we can simply go d5, just like I promised. And maybe if queen a4 pressurizing on knight, you go bishop d7. From there, life will continue. Once again, after knight g4, our Budapest move, and white plays d4, you just take. If knight takes, you remember to take back with your g knight. Oh, by the way, if knight takes, you just take back with your knight. That's fine. You can also take back with your b pawn and go d5, because later on you're going to put your knight on g6. All those ideas, you don't have to memorize one line. If bishop f4 is played, d5 is too risky due to knight takes. You're going to lose your d5 pawn, so go pawn to d6. It makes sense, because if knight takes, you have knight takes. If bishop b5, putting more pressure on your pinned knight, you simply have bishop d7. And this looks like the perfect defense if you think about it. You might even want to fianchetto your king side and castle short, since you have an open c file to attack with your rook. Say knight takes, you can even take back with your b pawn. Again, nothing much to memorize. If bishop takes e5, you want to take the b5 bishop so that white remains with some questions to answer. Next, you are going to develop all your pieces in harmony. After bishop c6, castle short, and pawn to e6. Why not pawn to e5? In the Sicilian defense, frankly speaking, we want to play pawn to d5, just getting rid of our d6 pawn weakness. Now, once again, after e5, knight g4, instead of pawn to d4, the main line goes as follows. Queen e2. Now, what do you do after queen e2? You still want to get back your e5 pawn, right? So the way you get it back is by playing queen c7. Or they are going to play knight b5 attacking your queen, but you have queen b8. This is all theory that I'm showing you guys, and this is the main line that you always want to know. Pawn to d4. As always, you always take on d4. Bishop f4, this is what they play. By the way, you can check in the Masters database once again. They play bishop f4. And now the move you always want to play, which is a theoretical one, is f6. Yes, you can play pawn to e6, but f6 is more matured because they can't take. You're going to take their hanging bishop. They play bishop g3 in most cases, still wanting to take. And now this is when you take back with your g knight. If knight takes e5, you don't even take back with your other knight, you take back with your pawn. And it so happens that you are just up a pawn or up by 2 pawns, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you still have all your pawns. And from here, you're going to chase your enemy's piece from your territory first, and then play e6, develop your bishop, castle short. So they'll be playing moves like c3, but d6 looks great to me. If pawn takes, this is when I chase the knight. After knight c3, I take on d4 with my other knight. And I have bishop f5 coming. If check, by the way, I have g6, bishop g7, castle short. This is only good for black. Still in the knight c3, 4 knights Sicilian, names of which variation. So we saw what happens if white plays pawn to e5. You just simply think of the Budapest Gambit or the Budapest defense, put your queen on b8 and continue with everything that you do. f6 is critical. Instead of pawn to e5, you might see the move bishop b5. With bishop b5, you can still go queen c7. So the plan is still the same. Just like in the knight g4 Budapest line, you always want to play queen c7, right? The other reason why we play queen c7 is to prepare for pawn to e5, by the way, if you are still wondering. For example, if white castles short, here we can play pawn to e5 and seal the deal. Now we are in the e4, e5 stuff with an improved c pawn. If pawn to d3, we go bishop e7. If bishop g5, attacking nothing, we just castle short. If bishop takes, we take back with our bishop. If knight d5, attacking our bishop and our queen, we go queen d8. We're not going to blunder anything. c3, d6, d4, no games in the database. You take back with your c pawn. This, you can oversimplify the game like this if you want, and then pop f4, a6, bishop c4, bishop e6. You want to take, and life continues from here. You will play rook c8, queen b6, rook e8, maybe put your bishop on d5. I don't know. So in all of these variations, even in the b5 line, that's why we put our queen on c7, just to play pawn to e5, given a chance. By the way, castle short is the top played move in both the Lichess database and the Masters database. But if it so happens that they take your knight, this is even better. You take back with your d pawn, you still want to go e5. If white plays e5 themselves, you can just go knight d5. Now back to our Alapin stuff. This has been played and black has never lost in this position. Oh, sorry, didn't turn on the Masters database. As you can see, all 100% wins. Anyway, if knight takes, you're just doing better. You are going to develop your light squad bishop, play e6 and castle short. By the way, from here, you just have a wonderful game. Again, bishop g4, h3, bishop takes, and queen takes e5. So you're just having a wonderful game. Sometimes after queen c7, instead of castling short or taking, white may play pawn to d3, another common move. Well, once again, you can just go pawn to e5 if you want to keep everything simple. Going back to the king's pawn game, you will always see them playing bishop g5, but you have bishop e7. If knight d5, this time you can even take on d5 first. If bishop takes, you have knight takes. If ed, first you have queen a5 check, then win the last squad bishop like this. Again, if bishop takes, you have knight takes. You're up a piece. If pawn takes, you have f6. f6 is an important move in this line, by the way. cd, check, bishop takes, bishop c1 to avoid queen takes b2, but you have bishop f5 and maybe castling long will come. It's only black who is better in this position. So we look at the last line now. We have seen what to do after e5. You just go knight g4, then queen c7. Even after bishop b5, you just go queen c7 and think of going e5. But what if they continue with the normal move, pawn to d4? Well, after pawn to d4, it is now straightforward to take and then play pawn to e5. That's if you're interested. If knight takes, you always take back with your b pawn, and this becomes easy to play d5 in the near future. Remember, you always want to get rid of your d6 weakness later in the game. So that will be supported by bishop b7, queen a5, and rook d8. Then think of playing pawn to d5. But after pawn to e5, if they don't take and say they play knight db5 like what they do, well, first you can play pawn to d6. And then after bishop g5, just like I advised in my yesterday's video, you don't play bishop e7 before chasing your enemy's knight from your territory. This is your yard. So this is the only thing you need to remember in the Sicilian defense. Never to entertain white's knight on b5 before playing bishop e7. If you just play bishop e7, they will take, and after you take, and they will play knight d5. Look at this. How are you going to stop this? This is just bad, but it's still playable. So bishop e7 can wait. Always begin by getting rid of the b5 knight first. Once it goes back, that's when you play b5, b4, or simply bishop e7. And I'm sure we looked at something like this in my yesterday's video. If you remember very well, you'll play bishop e6, get rid of that, castle short, and all that. Sometimes you can even consider playing pawn to b5 before playing bishop e7. I mean, after white plays knight a3, right? So you just go b5 to stop knight c4. If knight d5 comes anyways, this is when you play bishop e7. That's what theory states and allows. Again, if bishop takes, you take back with your bishop. And if pawn to c4, you just ensure that white doesn't have knight c4. So you go b4. This is the typical way of playing the Sicilian defense. In fact, a very safe one. Don't worry about your d6 pawn. It'll be traded sooner or later. Maybe after queen f3, you go bishop e7 first, and say after castle long, you go bishop e6. Point is to take, but this can wait. If you take right away, they are going to reinforce with the other knight, so you go bishop g5, pinning this other knight. If h4, that's when you take, and after fe, you can get rid of that, or castle short first, and get rid of this knight. The way you're going to support your d6 pawn is by playing queen c7, and maybe one of your rooks will guard that. So after d4, once again, just take. By the way, e5 is losing now because you have dc, and you're going to reach white's rook faster. If bishop takes, you take back with your e pawn, and you're better. So they will just have to take back, and then you go pawn to e5. Sometimes, if you want to play solidly, you can play pawn to e6. And if knight db5, again you go d6. This is the line that we looked at yesterday, where white might play bishop f4, pressurizing your d6 pawn 3 times. And then you go pawn to e5, and then they play bishop g5. What did I say? Again, you don't want to play bishop e7. Due to bishop takes and knight d5, you're going to have some weaknesses. So you first of all chase any knight that is on b5 first, before you continue with your attack. And the way I would start is by pushing pawn to b5. Why pawn to b5? Because I'm getting rid of knight c4 to pressurize my d6 pawn again. You don't want that to ever happen. They will play knight d5 due to b4, and then you go bishop e7, thinking of simplifying. This is the only thing you need to remember or memorize. Chase the knight away from your territory first before continuing with your development. So now we'll look at my second recommendation, pawn to e6, my favorite. With pawn to e6, we are giving white one more chance to reconsider their decision. We still want them to play pawn to e5, the second common move in the Masters database, so that if this happens, we can safely go back to our Alapin system. And this will be great for our eyeballs. After knight takes, we'll be glad to take back like this, because to get rid of our d6 weakness, we'll just play pawn to d6 and bishop takes. Clear. If pawn to d4, we don't even bother taking. This is no longer the normal Sicilian defense, so we just develop our knight to c6. See the top games in the Masters database, you guys. What I'm teaching you is what super grandmasters play in a very simple way. The whole point is, if white takes on c5, you simply take back on c5 like this. But say, are we not giving up a free pawn on d5? No. This is simply because we have queen b6, which attacks the f2 pawn, and there's little or nothing white can do to stop us from taking this. They might try bishop e3. Well, this is even worse, because after takes, we can take on b2 if we want and leave white with a very bad pawn structure, or just take on e3. After bishop e2, we castle short. They can't castle short because we're gonna take their last squad bishop, so we just slowed down their development. If queen d3, it's up to us to take or to play queen f4. With queen f4, we are threatening to take the e5 pawn. For example, after castle short, we can just go knight takes e5, and after knight takes, we take back like this. We are up a pawn, but we don't mind giving up this pawn for quick development, or maybe we're going to defend it. Besides, we are attacking the b2 pawn. After queen b6, pressurizing the f2 pawn together with the bishop. If white plays queen d2, well, we can just castle short. If bishop e2 trying to castle short, we take the f2 pawn. If bishop d3, now it's the e5 pawn that suffers. You can play rook e8 immediately, or start with pawn to d6, because you know after pawn takes, you have rook e8 check, an in-between move that may force white to lose their right to castle, because if bishop e2, once again you're gonna take on f2, so white will be forced to play king f1 or king d1 in this position. That's why you go d6 before rook e8, or rook e8 first to win back a pawn. If they play something like bishop c4, again rook e8 saves the day because you are pressurizing the e5 pawn, or again pawn to d6 because you just want to take on e5. That's how you get rid of your d6 weakness. Again, if they take, you have rook e8 check, somehow forcing white to lose their right to castle. And this was all in the knight c3 and pawn to e6 line. After e5, knight d5, knight takes, and pawn takes. So after d4, just remember to go knight c6. Never should you take. Let them take you so that you take back like this. If they take, you just remember to go queen b6, castle short, and put your rook on e8. It is the e5 pawn that you want to win back using the d6 pawn. That's the secret. There's also another tricky way that I like. Instead of queen b6, I go queen a5 sometimes, giving a check. Because if white plays the top played move in the latest database, as you can see, bishop d2, now I win a free queen with bishop takes f2 check, king takes, and then queen takes. So this is a very sneaky trap that your opponents are going to fall into. Sometimes they block with their c pawn. This is all the same. You just take on f2 with check and then win that queen. So the best they can do after queen a5 check is to block with their queen, not with their elbow. And then from here, you go queen c7. Look at that. So now you are pressurizing the e5 pawn, and this is good for your eyeballs. If they defend with queen f4, by the way, you won't see most of your opponents playing like this. I'm just preparing you for anything in advance. After queen f4, you just continue attacking. We have no time to play passively first, as you might have noticed. So just continue attacking. You can go queen b6 to pressurize the f2 pawn, or this time simply knight b4, trying to take on c2 with check, just to keep them busy. After queen takes d5, instead of playing queen b6 or queen a5 check, what masters do in this position is just to play pawn to d6. In fact, d6 is the top played move by masters, kind of a gambit. After d6, you just want white to take, but the whole point is not to take on d6. You now go queen b6, pressurizing the f2 pawn. If queen e4 check, you block with your last squad bishop, and now there's little that white can do to save the f2 pawn. If queen h4, you can simply take on h6, play bishop e7, and probably castle long in the near future. If bishop c4, you take on f2, making white lose their right to castle, and then you castle short. Allow this to happen, take back with the f pawn. If queen check, you put your king on h8, and now there's all sorts of discoveries. As you can see, you have rook a e8. If pawn to c3, maybe stopping knight d4, you simply have rook a e8, and white should be very careful, otherwise they are going to be checkmated like this. Knight d3, mate. But once again, I just advise you go queen b6, pressurizing the pawn. If bishop c4, again you just take on f2, getting back your pawn, and cast a shot, start playing chess. Still in the e6 line where white plays e5, again just go knight d5. But hey, it's not every time you're going to see your opponents taking on d5. In fact, they might play knight e4, maybe trying to give a check, but you can get rid of your d6 pawn as early as possible. Ed, you go bishop takes and continue playing normal chess. That's what you want to do. At the end of the day, you're going to remain with these powerful doubled pawns, castle shot, castle shot. After e5 and knight d5, again if they don't take, you'll see them playing d4. But what I said in my first tutorial video was to oversimplify the game like this. You don't always have to wait for the Alapin lines. You oversimplify the game like this, and now you go back to the French. You're waiting for them to take so that you take back with your bishop. If they take with ampersand, then you take back with your queen. That's if you don't want to exchange queens later. Next, you're going to develop your pieces normally. Instead of knight takes d5, knight e4, or pawn to d4, if they play bishop c4, since the bishop is not defended, I said go knight b6. The Alapin's move, bishop e2, you go knight c6. Sooner or later, you're going to get rid of your d6 pawn weakness. If they take with ampersand, you take back with your bishop and continue playing actively. You play h6 if you feel like, and that. Once again, back to what I can call the three knights, names of which Sicilian. So to make your life easy, just go e6, waiting for e5 to come. Now, once again, just like I said, you are not going to see most of your opponents playing pawn to e5. In fact, the Masters database justifies that. The top played move is d4. Even on leeches, in the leeches database, everyone plays d4 because they are not sure what you're up to. So after pawn to d4, the main line is to take on d4. No question about it. And this was somehow transposed back to one of the old lines that we already looked at. Let me show you. After cd and knight takes, to avoid the careless attack or any other deadly anti-Sicilian, I want you guys to play pawn to e5. Yes, the whole idea is to try and transpose the game back to the bishop g5 line, where you don't play bishop e7 immediately before sorting out the knight b5 problem. Remember what I advised earlier? You always want to get rid of that b5 knight first before developing your bishop to e7. So let that knight go back to a3, and then that's when you can consider playing bishop e7. But once again, after d4, if you don't like this idea of playing e5, going back to the old lines, sacrificing a pawn on b4, you can try my secret line beginning with the move queen a5. So you remember not to take on d4 like what everybody does. You go queen a5 and you will see the reason for this. If dc, you just take the e4 pawn, pressurize the knight, and take back on c5 with your knight later, or with your bishop, depending on the position. But they are not going to do that. They play bishop d2 and pinning their knight. But see, what I like about the line I'm about to show you is the simplicity and the fact that it is forcing. For example, from here you can just go ahead and take on d4, and your opponent may be tempted to do a little discovery with knight d5, which is a logical move, a discovery attack on the queen. Your next sequence of moves will be forcing, and there will be no memorization needed. Queen d8, logical stuff. They will take on f6, logical stuff. You take back with your queen, logical stuff. e5, logical stuff. Now, instead of going back to d8 and risk losing your d4 pawn for nothing, you better remember to play queen e7, temporarily blocking the vision of your dark squad bishop. Why? Because after knight takes d4, you want to put your queen on c5. Note that if you played queen d8, it was going to be hard for you to attack white's knight and the e5 pawn at the same time, which is why we play queen e7, and after this you do that to attack two things that they can hardly defend. They play bishop f4 most of the times, and then you pause a little bit and realize that it's time to solve the problem of your d pawn. Of course, a6 is okay, knight c6 is okay, but both of these moves will injure your d pawn. In the long run, it will be very difficult for you to develop this pawn due to the pawn on e5. So that's why I prefer doing this, so that I don't have to worry about my d pawn. There's no knight db5 because there's nothing to attack there if you think about it. If they take with ampersand, guess what? Even though bishop takes d6 is logical, but due to this simple tactic, I prefer you go pawn to e5. you might even win a piece. Look at this. Because if bishop takes, white is losing due to this, and you are just up a bishop if you look at this position. So probably they won't have to take on e5. The best they can do is to counterattack your queen, and then you go queen b4 check. If c3, you're going to win the bishop again, a free piece. If bishop d2, you go queen takes d6. Now you have taken back that pawn. Look at how beautiful your position looks. Bishop b5 check, knight c6, castle shot, bishop e7, bishop e3, queen g6, avoiding a queen trade, bishop takes, queen takes, and life continues. Now wait a second. Once again, after you play e6, in the hope that you may get back to the early hands, and then all of a sudden white plays d4, you have an option to take and then play pawn to e5 in the near future, and d6 going into the bishop g5 old line, or to play my creative line with queen a5, pinning the knight to the king. Once again, after bishop d2, this is when you take. We saw what happens if knight d5 discovery. You just continue playing that forcing sequence which I just showed you, and probably win the e5 pawn with your queen. But this time, your opponent might not play this discovery. They might take on d4. After this, you just play queen b6 because you are attacking the b2 pawn and also the knight. If knight b3, this is when you play knight c6, preventing e5. They might play bishop d3, intending to castle short, but here you continue with your normal development, bishop b4. By the way, why not playing d5? Because I said get rid of your d pawn problem as early as you can. Well, in this case, we're just going to remain with an isolated pawn after all that. So bishop b4 first, we want to take and then play pawn to d5. If a3, you just take, and then instead of playing pawn to d5, due to bishop takes, you can even play e5. Going back to your e4, e5 stuff, after castle short, you now play d5 since there is no bishop takes f6. This is kind of the Scotch where they might take and then you take back with your knight. Your c knight is defending the e5 pawn. White may think bishop takes will be great because there is this future pin, but this is losing if you think about it due to knight takes. If rook e1, you have f6. They can't play f4 due to your queen on b6. If queen h5 check, a common move, you don't even have to play g6, you have king f8. Still, you are up a piece. They might sack a rook out of desperation. You take, say bishop c4, attacking your knight, you protect it like this, queen takes e5. It's not your bishop which is under attack, it is your knight. So you protect it with your rook. Rook d1, now you force a trade, a queen trade. If they say no, you save your bishop first. They might do this in an effort to win your light squad bishop, but again, g6 is your savior. Because after queen takes, and pap, yes, they managed not to lose a piece, but they're going to lose this pawn anyways. And I mean, there's just nothing they can do to save that. You can even simplify the game like this, and it's just game over. So it is up to you to choose which line you like between the c takes d4 line or my queen a5 line. Let me know in the comment section.